Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Karad Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2007 animated fantasy comedy family film Shrek the Third. Now, Shrek the Third runs for 1 hour and 33 minutes long. It is directed by Chris Miller. The script was written by Jeffrey Price, Peter S. Seaman, Chris Miller, and Aaron Warner. It was produced by Andrew Adamson. It is, of course, based on the novel picture book inspired. This was, of course, inspired by the novel picture book by William Steig or Stieg. It is composed by Harry Gregson Williams, and it was edited by Michael Andrews. And it features the voice talents of Mike Myers, Cameron Diaz, Eddie Murphy, Antonio Bandaras, Rupert Everett, Justin Timberlake, Julie Andrews, a couple of Monty Python icons, including John Cleese and Eric Idle, Conrad Vernon, Cody Cameron, Larry King, Christopher Knights, comedians like Amy Poehler, Maya Rudolph, who are, of course, from Saturday Night Live, Amy Sedaris, Aron Warner, another Saturday Night Live alum, Cheri Oteri, British acting legend Ian McShane, Susanne Blakeslee, talk show host, the late great Regis Philbin, Mark Valley, Chris Miller, John Krasinski, comedian Seth Rogan, Tom Kane, and Kari Wahlgren. Okay, so a lot of people have really condemned this third installment of the Shrek series to the ground. I mean, people just completely condemned this movie badly. And I can understand why. I mean, I'm not arguing with them. I'm not saying they're wrong. Sure, this movie has a lot of flaws to it. And people could say that it is inferior to the other previous two Shrek movies. I mean, this one just kind of lost its magic. It lost its originality. And I guess it also lost its appeal. Some people might say it was just one sequel too many. Many people have said that this was one Shrek too many, or even the trilogy we never wanted. But then, 3 years later, they would make Shrek Forever After. I guess, I don't know whether that was just sort of like as an apology for the mass criticism Shrek the Third received, but nonetheless. Of course, Shrek has, of course, the crossover with many other fairy tale characters, but we will get more into that. Okay, like I said, I agree to some extent that this is inferior compared to the other two movies of the series, and that it falls in an all too familiar trope that three's a crowd. Two's company, three's a crowd. Or three is one too many. And it sometimes comes to the point where we ask filmmakers if they will ever learn their lesson about making movies past part 2. I mean, The Godfather Part 3 was inferior to the other two Godfathers. Kung Fu Panda 3 is inferior than compared to the other two Kung Fu Panda movies. I never think that the trilogy of a movie really gets the idea that after the second installment, it just loses its flavor. Sure, the movie is no exception to the whole three's a crowd trope. But still, would I consider it to be the worst film in the world? Far from it. I have seen a lot worse. I have walked through worse shit than this movie. I'm not calling it a classic by any stretch of the imagination. But at the same time, I'm not here to condemn it like the way a lot of people did. I'm not going to plant it to the ground and step on it 100 times. I don't think it deserves that kind of treatment. Inferior to the other two, yes, but not the worst movie I've ever seen. Okay. I understand that when someone utters the third part of any movie, most people might slap their heads forward in disgust. But I watched it because I enjoyed the first two, and it was great that it kind of like picked up from where the second installment left off. I mean, it starts off with Prince Charming wanting to rescue a princess, only to discover that his position, his bravado from the second movie, has been washed away as he's now performing in dinner theaters, where he's basically entertaining a bunch of dinner guests. He's been lowered of his status. He's been demoted of his legacy. Obviously, we could clearly tell he's not enjoying his life, or has not enjoyed his life after the second installment. So he's just practically scraping by in a low wage dinner theater job. So I thought it was pretty good to see that they picked up from where they left off, but not too far off. And I was just excited, about to see what transpired in the third part of the series. So we start off with the later scene. We come to the conclusion that King Harold, voiced by John Cleese, has died, and asks Shrek, voiced by Mike Myers, to take his place as the ruler of Far, Far Away. However, though, Shrek doesn't seem to be interested in holding that position. They see him all dressed up and pampered in these weird medieval type clothes. And I believe he accidentally may have killed somebody when they were doing like the sword tapping thing. Yeah, I just don't think Shrek is really up for that kind of role as a ruler of a land. So the king recommends a teenage outcast who is also his nephew, who goes by the name of Arthur Pendragon, voiced by Justin Timberlake, to be the heir to the throne. But of course, Arthur, he too also doesn't feel that he could take the legacy. Although most of the movie was about Shrek trying to like persuade Arthur that he has what it takes to become a king. He just needs to build the confidence that he needs to do. And also try to break away from being ridiculed to respect it. But in order for him to actually earn the respect, he also has to find the respect in himself. There were some funny scenes where Shrek was trying on more majestic like apparel, but he turned him down the offer nonetheless. So Shrek, along with his pals Donkey, voiced by Eddie Murphy, and Puss in Boots, voiced by Antonio Bandaras, they try to persuade Arthur that he will make a great king and tries to ensure more confidence in himself, going through all kinds of regimens. Of course, it doesn't just require skill; it requires strategy. It requires great decision making, and it also requires great leadership. He just needs to find that confidence in him. So while this is happening, Princess Fiona, voiced by Cameron Diaz, along with her mother, Queen Lillian, voiced by Julie Andrews, they gather a group of fairy tale princesses to stop Prince Charming, voiced by Rupert Everett, from scheming his way to become a king. Oh yeah, that too, and of course Fiona has some news to Shrek, and that she and Shrek are not the only two ogres who are going to be part of their family. In other words, Fiona's going to add a little bit more company to them, if you know what I mean. Alright, to get to the point, Fiona is pregnant. So we're going to have a few other miniature Shreks running around rampant. But Shrek also seems to be not too much up to the task of becoming a father. And of course, he has some kind of deep rooted story that his father actually tried to eat him. But also, it also raises a little hypocrisy in the part of Shrek himself. I mean, Shrek is trying to persuade Arthur to be confident in himself while he's not confident in himself either. I mean, it just doesn't work on both ends of the spectrum here, folks. How can you train someone to get confidence in themselves when you don't even have confidence in yourself? But still, nonetheless, still nonetheless, that's a lot about what the story is. Now, of course, Prince Charming is not gonna scheme his way to becoming king on his own. He goes into a bar where he meets a whole bunch of other fairy tale villains like Captain Hook and the Wicked Queen and and the Wicked Stepsisters and all these other villains that that have been defeated by their protagonists. He's trying to get them to be on his side. But of course, in all fairy tale respects, and of course, in all fairy tales, Prince Charming is always seemed to be portrayed as a protagonist. Well, to counteract that claim, Prince Charming in this movie is the big bad. He is the villain in this story. I mean, in spite of his good looks and his appeal and his charisma, underneath that handsome face is an evil mind. And of course, he's trying to get them to, persuade them to make him a king while also having them deserve their happy ending. Even if it means taking down a few fairy tale protagonists themselves. Apparently Princess Fiona and the rest of the other girls get locked in a tower, like in typical cliche fairy tale fashion. There's also some betrayal as Rapunzel apparently turns against them and aligns herself to the forces of evil led by Prince Charming and the other fairy tale villains. So then they, along with, Donkey, Puss in Boots, A few other characters like Gingy, Pinocchio, and a few other characters as well. They, of course, are going to try to take down Prince Charming and the rest of the other fairy tale villains in order for in order so that Prince Charming himself does not become the king, because I know they say that if he becomes king, he's not going to become he's not going to become a loyal ruler. He wants this role for both power, greed, and corruption, which all is synonymous with the words evil. It seems to be a rather simple story, and definitely has important and effective messages to be told. Plus, it actually scores points in terms of being innocent in its revisionist take on the old fairy tale genre. But then again, it also did that too in the other two movies. But the main weakness is that it doesn't feel very original anymore. It was clear from the sequel that Shrek wasn't interested in ruling the land and felt living the life of an ogre, going back to the swamp, and he and Fiona could live their lives. And the fairy tale characters can live in peace. The only difference is that in this third chapter, we now have him questioning if he's capable of raising a bunch of other little ogres due to the fact that Fiona is pregnant. The main villain is unoriginal, though, as instead of creating a new baddie, they just recycled the secondary antagonist and made him the principal bad guy. I mean, the first one was Lord Farquaad. I don't remember who the second bad guy was because I haven't seen the second Shrek in a while. But here, of course, Prince Charming is the big bad here. Yeah. I also like to point out that there was a lot of pop culture references in this movie that I like to point out. So when it comes to its humor, Shrek the Third has its moments, especially when Prince Charming was interrogating Pinocchio, and of course, when Pinocchio lies, his nose grows. Well, yeah, yeah, the old schnauzer inflates again here. But the thing is that I wasn't bursting out laughing compared to the other three outings, including Shrek Forever After. In fact, there were times that I felt the humor displayed here was at times questionable to the point where it felt awkward, especially when Shrek goes to Arthur's fairy tale school and he's practically ridiculed by the other classmates, and it makes Arthur look even more like a dweeb than he has before. I mean, he was being pushed around and bullied in typical high school bully fashion, but you know, yeah, and so with Shrek around to try to pull him out of the school to say that, hey, guess what? You don't need to be schooled. You're now royalty. And of course, he doesn't really like the idea of royalty. And so, yeah, that's pretty much what the story was. I mean, it just felt very awkward many times. It also fell between the cracks of not funny enough to lacking in creativity. It felt like the energy and the pacing had slowed down from the other two Shreks, and at times it felt flat in many areas. For example, when Shrek tries to get Arthur out of Fairy Tale High School, he tries to outwit the other students, which of course didn't turn out well. It might look like a hilarious concept, but in the end, the idea was only half baked to the point where it just becomes tedious to watch. I guess part of the blame could also be, I know I don't like to do this because it sounds so cliche to blame the director for this debacle of a third installment. Well, it's not a complete debacle, but inferior to the other two. Is that it's, of course, the whole change the director type of thing happened. So apparently, Andrew Adamson, who directed the previous Shrek films and wrote the scripts, decided to step down from the director's chair and was replaced by Chris Miller, who of course probably had more ideas of his own. It's not to say that Adamson was completely out of the rotation, but he's still on board, though he serves as a producer this time around. So he still has some creative control, but not complete creative control. He doesn't get the final words. So, from my observation, I assume there were a few changes, a few modifications made due to the new person in charge. And that's not always necessarily a good thing because a lot of material comes up quite short. The action scenes from the previous outings were rich, whimsical, and spontaneous. And granted, this is a fantasy animated comedy and not a hard nosed action romp, but the fast paced scenes from the other two movies offered a lot more than what we got here. Also, the song choices featured here seem to be quite wrong at times, and it's just like padded on for whatever reason. The Fairy Tale High School song seems okay at best, and while it is set around the medieval periods, I think the songs are like from a pop culture standpoint, just don't fit in with the time period. Even though many of these songs are classics, they just don't fit the story. They don't fit the narrative. It just seemed weird that when the princesses start fighting with the fairy tale villains, we get the immigrant song by Led Zeppelin. You know that. Also, who in their right minds would want to play Paul McCartney and Wings Live and Let Die during a funeral? Good song, yes. Good song, yes, but it just does not belong in a Shrek movie. Live and Let Die is strictly a James Bond film. And where does Heart's Barracuda fit into the story? So I guess I'm assuming Chris Miller likes late 60s, 70s music. But it just does not fit the time period. It just sometimes gets a little bit frustrating. I'm not saying it's laboring, and I could probably find a little bit of level of humor there, here and there, with that idea. But where does it belong? It doesn't. So, underneath all the flaws, Shrek the Third isn't a complete letdown. It just kind of feels inferior and anticlimactic and doesn't really live up to the standards of the other two movies. The execution was awkward, the originality was absent, and the magic was just not there this time. Maybe seriously, Hollywood will learn that a third installment doesn't need to be made if it was going to lower our expectations. So, I'm not going to shed upon it by saying that it's the worst movie I've ever seen. Too many people sometimes have that tendency to say these kind of things. I don't think it deserves that kind of condemnation. But at the same time, but at the same time, I think the reason they did Shrek Forever After was basically an apology for the god awful. Well, it wasn't god awful, but for the inferior made Shrek the Third. So therefore, if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would give this movie Shrek the Third from 2007 a 6 out of 10. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the three simple rules: be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Karate Rider saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.